And with your permission, can I just continue without you?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
It's all yours.
Our next speaker is Professor John Warner. Professor John Warner is the John Bunting Chair of Public Administration, Australia and New Zealand School of Government at ANU. His area of expertise include Australian politics and public policy, budgetary systems and reforms, policy implementation, and comparative government. Professor John Warner has authored or co-authored 15 books, including 2 national textbooks on policy and public management. I counted about 60 publications, either authored or co-authored by Professor John Warner. I may not have counted those which are not in public domain. Notably, he was a chief investigator in a major Australian Research Council funded study of the future of government in Australia in 2001. I wonder some of the things which we are facing may be of his doing. He is also a professor of public policy at Griffith University and honorary professor at the China University of Political Science and Law. Please welcome Professor John Warner.
Thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I hope you enjoyed your lunch as much as we did on our table. Mohammed asked me to talk a bit about the current government, why we've ended up with it, and what we might, I suppose, expect from it. And let me say that Australia is a very long-standing democracy. As many of the world now is fighting to implement democracy. If you look at Thailand and various parts of Africa, Latin America, democracy's shallow roots at best. Australia is a very old democracy. In fact, some of the early factors of democracy were developed here. Administrative independence of the electoral commissions was an Australian invention. The secret ballot, not being told to vote according to what your boss was an Australian, very early intervention. Compulsory voting around the First World War and in different jurisdictions following that was a kind of Australian so-called innovation which we haven't sold to many nations in the world. I have heard though that Jamaica, which had a really low turnout last election, is talking about introducing compulsory voting to make and vote to get their turnout up. But having said that, and we have 3-year terms federally. At the state level it's a bit more mixed, but at the federal level we have 3-year terms, which is generally internationally regarded as short. Having said that, if you go back to 1943, we've changed government 7 times in 70 years. So we don't change government very often. So we've got a democratic process, and we tend to affirm and reaffirm governments until we get sick of it. And I think governments change for 2 principal reasons. One, there's a contest of ideas, and the population of Australia largely wants the new ideas of an opposition. And I think, in part, around the period of 69 to 72, that was very much what our politics is about. One set of ideas from the Conservative group, one set of ideas from a social democratic, technocratic Labour group, and eventually Liberal kind of won that. The other reason why we change governments is because we get sick of the last ones. We get bored with them, we think they're inefficient, we think they're incompetent. And I suspect the last election was very much about that. It's unusual for us to get rid of a government in 6 years. Labour would probably, in 2007, have thought they were going to be in for at least 3 terms. They would not have expected to be back in the Home Parliament in 2010, actually with 1 seat less than their competitors, and certainly not booted out in 2013. So most of our governments last, on average, and it is up and down, 10 years, changing very frequently. Also, it takes time for new government to settle in, I think for two reasons. One, they're inexperienced and often have not settled into their new portfolios, their new ministerships or whatever. This government had a bit of a luxury in that 11 of its members of the government have been former ministers, and that's because they were out of government for a relatively short period of time. If you look at when John Howard came back into government, there was just two of them. He had been a minister, a senior minister, and he was probably three-quarters of that government, probably their best minister. And John Moore, who was a bit of a fool. But they were the only two that had any ministerial experience in 96. This one's got 11, and some of the people at the top of this government are ministers under John Howard. They take a while to get used to their responsibilities and what they can do, what they can't do, how they're going to deal with the states, all those kinds of things in Australian politics. They also start to realise governing is difficult. If opposition is a horrible job, governing is a more difficult job because you're contending with lots of things you don't know the answers to, lots of pressures, lots of constituents that you want to appease or not appease, ones you want to keep on side, ones you may want to antagonise. So that's one thing, the politicians and also the public servants they work with. The other one, it takes us some time to get used to them too. It takes us used to the idea that they're the government, that they're making policies. And so governments are in that kind of space. So are we better or worse? It's a bit too soon to tell yet, and that's not screwing the question. I don't think they've settled into government yet. We'll be better able to judge, I think, probably in their second term. And they've got some big issues coming up. I think last election was a bit of a non-event, certainly non-event for me. There was no money, and once there's no money, you can't promise a lot. So most of the promises were minuscule, or they were what I call not promises. We'll get rid of the carbon tax, we'll get rid of the mining tax. So there's not a lot of new things going around. And some people suggested that the coalition had kind of like a secret agenda. There were things that they were working on that didn't see the light of day. That may be the case, that things are popping out. Some people argued Labour had a respectable loss, respectable loss in that they didn't lose as badly as we might have thought they would. One bit of evidence for that is that there was a JWS poll about June 2013 that suggested if Labour didn't improve anything, they were likely to lose about 25 marginal seats. That's probably the worst poll result I saw in terms of that. They lost 17, so they came pretty close, so it was not that respectable loss. If you look at the results for the last election, there's some interesting things, and they've been interesting in our results since 98. In 98, or prior to 98, almost everybody voted for the major parties. And a small group voted for the Democrats in the Senate, which was usually sitting on about 5% of the vote. The Democrats rarely ever won a quota. They got quotas from preference arrangements. They did, just like people are harvesting them now. If we look from 98 on, suddenly a great slice of Australians peel off the major parties. It's about 20%, something to 20 to 25%, who are not voting now. Their primary vote for either the Liberal Party, National Party or Labour Party. They're voting for someone else. They're voting for independents, they're voting for minor parties, they're voting up to protest. Added to that, there's about 3 million people, adult Australians who could be on the roll or are on the roll and choose not to vote. They vote informally, which is getting close to 1 million now every election. They don't turn up, which is 750,000, and there's about 1.5 million not on the roll who could be on the roll with the Electoral Commission constantly trying to catch. So there's a body of kind of disaffection there with major parties. If you look at Labour's vote in the last election, they got their historical lowest vote ever, 33, primary vote, those people who put one for Labour, 33.38%. Means 1 in 3 Australians voted Labour. Their average is around 40. When they form government, it's usually 45, 46. Coalition got 45.55. So their primary vote was quite high. Labour picked up a lot more of the preference votes from other parties, minor parties, and ended up with about a 3% swing. So the last time it was almost neck and neck in 2010, but the last election there's about 53 to the coalition, 46.5 to So Labour's sitting on 55 seats. They need really 20 seats to form government. So although those who think it's a respectable loss, Labour need to halve their numbers again to get over the 75, 76 needed to form the majority government. So it's a big ask. And we're seeing, again, 5 independents, micros in the current representatives, the Party, the Parliament Party, the Greens, and 2 independents. Looking ahead, what do I think this government will be like? I don't think it's going to be neoliberal. I think there were elements of John Howard's government that was neoliberal. I think there's elements of the Paul Keating government that were neoliberal. I think this government's going to be a socially conservative government, not just because of Abbott, or because that is his position. I think a lot of the ministry, their instincts are socially conservative. I think they do not believe the market is the solution to all problems. So what will that mean? I think they'll take a fairly conservative line internationally, they'll take a fairly conservative line in terms of social policy, but they'll be quite strong on state authority and states doing things. I think infrastructure is one. I think they're going to use immigration a lot more going into the future. The whole area of infrastructural development, I think he will tackle some of the federal issues. There is a great opportunity, if they want to sort out some issues. There are many issues that play around where both sides, both levels of government, state and federal, get involved. So I think of aged care or health or aspects of education from schooling to VOC to universities. Both levels of governments are involved, both do a bit of bipartisan, both kind of don't do it. On the infrastructure side, Commonwealth gives states money and then they don't build the roads. There's all that sort of problem. There is potential, if they want to sort some of those things out. And I suspect if a Conservative government put referendum questions that the Commonwealth would take 100% responsibility, say, for aged care and caring, I reckon they'd get that through. So it just depends on how courageous they want to be. I think there are other referendums they haven't got a cat else chance to get through, but I think on some, if they pick their top ones, there is a good chance. They may even get a referendum through on health, because that is the kind of big spending time bomb going forward. And the states cannot, have no tax base, the states cannot afford to increase health as we are demanding as a population. So I think strong state conservative is likely to be it. They've got themselves into a few problems early on. They've got a commission of audit which is going to buy them a little bit of time. We're hearing on the grapevine that it's not really addressing taxation issues. That's a political no. But so it'll have to address expenses issues, which is where does it want to make cutbacks, which parts of government does it want to cut. If you look at government, there is federal government, there is 3 large chunks of their budget, and they're all about equal size, they're all approximately a third. A third goes into individual entitlements and benefits. They're the pensions, and there's 20 of them, 20 different kinds. You could cut those, freeze those, de-index them. You could do all sorts of things if they want to, but that would lead to 8 to 9 million people rebelling against the government. Second third is the states of money that goes to the states. Commonwealth collects income tax, Commonwealth collects GST, Commonwealth collects company tax, and many other taxes. It then transfers considerable money to the state. Commonwealth could cut that, but that is going to cut services in health, education, schools, land management, all the things, environment management, all the things that state governments do. John Howard did that for a while in 1960 to 97, and then gradually started piling those funds back on. And the third area is their own Commonwealth use, which pays for their departments, their programs, their grants, defence, all the things the Commonwealth does, the national system of government. Now they have been cutting and tweaking that for nearly a decade now. There may be some areas where they can still cut. They can't cut defence without making defence completely non-functional. I don't know if you remember the last cyclone that was in Queensland. We had no ship that could go and get there for like 3 weeks because one was in dry dock, one didn't have a crew, and one was broken down somewhere else. So there are problems. If they keep cutting, there'll be problems in the Commonwealth's own capacity. The tax office this morning is saying if you keep taking those 900 out, our capacity to actually collect tax may be compromised by the fact that we just don't have the stuff. The paid parental leave issue is a really thorny one for this government. It was a leitmotif, I suppose, for Tony Abbott. It's very attractive if you're a working woman about to have a baby on a decent salary. You get 6 months, and up to 75,000. It's not attractive if you're not in the workforce. It's not attractive particularly if you're low paid. What it does for the government, though, is it says, we'll offer this generous scheme for this one area while we're wanting to make lots of cutbacks across the board to all the other areas. So it's constituency against constituency, and they're going to have to resolve that. Already seeing quite a lot of the government people breaking ranks a little in terms of, is it affordable, is it a good idea, is it going to get us more into trouble? The fiscal problems of this government will be quite strong. I don't think we're going to come out of, I don't think we're going to come into surplus until maybe 18, maybe 2019. New Zealand may come into surplus at the end of this year. Korea's already in surplus, Sweden's already in surplus, Germany's in surplus. I don't think we are. I don't know. If you look at the MAIFO, the half-year report on the budget, it still has it showing at 47 billion, and they're saying even if it improves, it might still be 43, 45 billion. Now that's the, I think, 8th deficit we have recorded federally since 2008, which combined is getting close to about $330 billion. Now going from a position where we had no debt to where we got $330 billion debt. The debt servicing charge of that is 20 to 20 billion just alone, which would pay for the National Disability Insurance Scheme on its own if we didn't have to pay the insurance on that debt. The asylum seeker problem is one they are addressing in their terms, and they're addressing by being kind of non-transparent, because the more the industry and the media know about it, the worse the problem gets. So let's keep the can on all the information. I'm not saying that would be a pattern across all areas of portfolios, but it certainly is in this one. But I'm not sure where it's going to end. Will it stop people smugglers? We don't have a regional solution. It's very difficult to totally stop it. All we're doing is sort of log rolling it onto someone else. And we may, if we are thinking seriously about immigration and increasing the workforce, Bob Gregory was just walking past a few minutes ago, and I remember him saying a few years ago there was 10 people in the workforce for every person in care, on benefits, age benefits in particular. We're now getting close to being 3 in the workforce for every one on care. So that ratio has changed enormously. The only way we can change that, we can't kill people, the only way we can change that is to get a bigger workforce so that you actually bring those ratios back into line. The carbon tax, I think they will get that through. I think at the end of the day, they're just going to knock down the ditch on it, and I think they'll get enough crossbench support with the new Senate. It's interesting what they're doing with business welfare. Normally, Conservative governments look after business. John Howard even looked after his own brother when he got into trouble in business. I mean, looking after business mates is a kind of classic Conservative coalition policy. They've said no now to about 4 or 5 major things, including foreign acquisitions, General Motors, the fruit cans, and Qantas, but not to drought. And it's a loan, by the way. It's not a grant. So I think the future, they've got some big issues to deal with: the economy, the environment, federalism, tax. We've got a tax review coming, but is it going to say anything different than Ken Henry said in his 138 references, recommendations? I'm not so sure. So watch this space, but I think it's going to be a social conservative, maybe decade. I don't know. Maybe upgrade. Thanks.